on to another adventure in Australian literature. So I don't think it's a surprise who the author is this week, because just a few weeks ago we had the announcement that the famous writer, the great Australian writer David Malouf, had died. So we're doing a David Malouf. But before we get to exactly which David Malouf we are doing, remember, if you want to support us, there is our shop where we have books and writing services. There is our Redbubble shop where we have over 100 designs. So if you want to support us that way, that's where you can do that. The links are below. If you want to support us and you don't want to spend any money, that's fine. Like, subscribe, comment and share. So, what are we doing? We are doing David Malouf's first novel, Johnno. Now, David Malouf had already established himself as a poet of note before publishing this book in 1975. It was his first novel. He spent a lot of time on it, and it received fairly mixed reviews when it came out, though it had some very, very big supporters, one of whom was Patrick White. So, what is this novel that critics were lukewarm about, but readers have loved? Well, Johnno is a semi-autobiographical novel about the narrator's, in which case the semi-autobiographical quality is David Malouf. Though he's never called David, he's only referred to by a nickname, which is Dante, which I will get to. But the narrator of this novel is a boy from Brisbane. He is a what you would call upper middle class. Australia has no upper class. We have no upper class. There are no gentry in this country, but there is certainly upper middle class. He is an upper middle class child. He's born into an upper middle class family. Now, Australian upper middle class is entirely economic. Most of this is economic, but unlike, other places like in England, for instance, where you have actually a level above, which is the upper class, the landed gentry, the nobility, that sort of thing. Basically anyone can technically become upper middle class. You just have to earn enough money and go to the right school and have the right accent. There's a couple of things, but it's a lot less hard to shift classes, though the economic equality makes it much harder nowadays to shift classes. You can always go down. Going up is the hard bit. But it always has been the hard bit. So anyway, David Malouf comes from an upper middle class family in Brisbane. So does his narrator. We open the story in, really, I think has to be about the time, the 70s, when this is actually being written and published. So this is a reflective novel, as any autobiographical thing is. It's looking to the past. But the novel opens when the narrator returns home from overseas because his father has died suddenly. And it's while he is cleaning out the house for his mother and looking for documents and putting everything into order that he finds an old school photo from Brisbane Grammar. Okay, that's how we know he's upper middle class. Brisbane Grammar's a very posh school. He finds a photo from Brisbane Grammar and he sees a classmate who he remembers, and that's Johnno. even Johnno's name we don't fully get until we get to the end. It's only at the end that we realise his name isn't John. He's not Johnno because he's John. He's Johnno because his last name is Johnson. And Johnno is a tearaway. He is a boy who lost his father in the war. So these are children born in the late 1930s or the mid 1930s. They are children for whom the Second World War was part of their lives. These are children who saw fathers go off and not return, or return in quite an altered state after either fighting or being POWs in Southeast Asia, POWs of the Japanese. So this is the world of their childhood. Johnno's father doesn't return. The narrator's father doesn't go. He had gone to the First World War. He's too old. So Johnno, the excuse for Johnno being a tearaway and quite a mischief maker is that his father is still among the missing. His father isn't coming home. This is the excuse people make. Reading this, I read this and it's like, oh, he has ADHD. That's what he is. This kid has ADHD. And the more you read of the book, the more you realise, yeah, he has ADHD. He's clearly not stupid, because Johnno goes to university just the same as the narrator, and he studies geology, but every aspect of his life screams, this person has ADHD, this person today would receive medication and things to stabilise them so that this chaos is not their life. But I think that's more of a me thing. That's probably more of a me thing, just simply because I'm more aware of that given my day job. But it's Johnno who befriends the narrator. Johnno admires the narrator. The narrator is kind of scared of him. He hangs out with bullies. He's a bit rough. But once he befriends the narrator, he actually sort of pulls himself out of that. He shakes them off. He actually takes advantage of the opportunity he has been given through his scholarship to Brisbane Grammar. I don't think his family are as wealthy, though they're not poor. They're not poor, but they are definitely less well off than the narrator's family. Part of the reason why Johnno was able to shake off this misfit, misbegotten reputation is because the boys he ran with have all, left school, gone off, got apprenticeships, which this is the 1940s, so they're very, very young. They're 12 and 13-year-olds who are going off to get a job in a factory or something. So Johnno and the narrator, who he starts to call Dante after he discovers that the narrator writes poetry, develop this somewhat uneasy friendship, mostly because Johnno keeps instigating it, and the narrator is definitely drawn to the wildness of Johnno. The narrator's straight-laced, tightly held, middle-class, upper-middle-class upbringing, his very English mother, is sort of challenged by Johnno. It's like, well, we can go to the pub and we can go and do this and we can go and do that, and the narrator enjoys this wildness that Johnno brings into his life. They both go to the university. They both see girls. One of the things Johnno likes to do is go to the brothels and argue and get thrown out. This is why I'm saying he has ADHD. He's got problems with dopamine. That's what he wants, this excitement. He really does. He's this is it becomes really clear if you know that you're looking at that. So I'm afraid that was just what I ended up picking up there. But everything in his life screams that throughout the entire novel. It's not just that he's a cranky, naughty boy. Everything he does screams, oh, you're trying to get dopamine because you don't get it. That's what you're doing. You're after excitement. And David is tagging along with excitement. Johnno, after university, gets a job in Africa with a mining company. He pulls together quite a lot of money, but by the time that the narrator, who's been floating around Brisbane doing nothing much, doing a boring job that really isn't appropriate for his skills, doing some tutoring, scrapes together enough money to go to Europe, when he meets Johnno again in Paris, Johnno is living in a really rough neighbourhood and he's got no money and he's teaching English and with a fake accent because nobody wants to learn English from an Australian. And again, he's proposing all these madcap schemes, which he has no intention of actually going through with. Because the minute the narrator goes and says, oh, well, maybe I'd like to do that. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. The narrator goes and goes to England and teaches in England and again visits, like over the summer holidays, goes to Europe, visits Johnno again, this time in Greece. Again, he's teaching. And eventually he decides to return to Brisbane, return home. So he returns home, and again, he's sort of just floating around, except that floating around at nearly 30 is kind of sort of not so great. This is the early 60s. And he's looking around Brisbane to all the people who never left, and they've got married, they've got kids, they're well established in careers as doctors and lawyers and architects, the kinds of careers that upper middle class boys who go to Brisbane Grammar get. And it's here he again runs into Johnno. And Johnno he's still chasing that high, but chasing that high is taking a toll on him. And Dante is again reluctant to engage with him by this point. Dante, he is constantly reaching out. He reaches out and reaches out and reaches out. And Dante, as usual, is reluctant, and it's this reluctance that will create that colours the whole novel, because the whole novel is told in retrospect. I won't spoil the ending of it, but it's definitely a case that someone was failed in this. One of them was failed in this terribly from a lack of understanding, which by the time you're 30 feels a little bit like, I think you probably do need to grow up at that point. Just a little bit. So that really colours the end of the novel. There is an epilogue. The epilogue was written about 20 years after it was published, so in about 1994, 95. I did read the epilogue. You don't have to. I actually don't think the epilogue adds a great deal. So if you don't read the epilogue, it probably wouldn't hurt. It was originally not published with the epilogue. The other big element of this is a Brisbane novel. In fact, it won a prize as one of the best novels. It was a co-win with another book about Brisbane as the novel that epitomizes Brisbane. And throughout this novel, you can sort of see Brisbane as an analogue for the narrator. This weird, gawky outpost on the edge of the north. This city that's barely a city still made of weatherboard houses, a city where the river still stinks and is full of mangroves, that hasn't been really, hasn't really grown into itself. This is old Brisbane. This is Brisbane that got inundated with American troops during the war. This is very old Brisbane, a Brisbane that no longer exists, and started to no longer exist within the life of the character, because when the narrator returns from England, it's not the same city that he left 5 years earlier. Progress, development, the confidence of a country that is starting to decide, you know what, it's about time we actually started standing up and being ourselves, is taking over the city, which is one of the things that you feel about that is something that the narrator is forced to come to terms with when he returns to Australia. And it's something that definitely his relationship with Johnno forces him to reckon with. Is he going to grow up? Is he going to actually, is he actually going to put away all that doubt, all of that unsureness that has been plaguing him, because it's neither serving him nor his friends well. It's all, by the time, what is acceptable when you're 20 or 21, that unsure quality, by the time you're 30, looks self-indulgent. And so the city itself is in its own way sort of saying, yeah, you're being left behind, mate. You're being left behind. He sees his friends from school and they're leaving him in the dust. They're married, they have kids. They're not sitting still, they're moving ahead, they have lives. These lives might be ordinary suburban lives, but they're lives, and they're not crippled by self-consciousness. Now, I think this book put me in mind of, and the character of Johnno also put me in mind of a book that was published nearly 10 years, about 11 years earlier than this, which is My Brother Jack by George Johnson, which I have never got to be able to finish because George Johnson is not nearly as good a writer as David Malouf. The writing in this is beautiful. I will say that before I get to any criticisms. As usual, the writing is gorgeous. David Malouf gives Brisbane, gives his characters a poet's eye. It is beautiful language. It's actually fairly long for a David Malouf. His novels can be on the shorter side. I think this is the longest one we've read, and yet it still reads very fast. Not because you just bolt it, but because it just breezes you through it. But as I say, it reminded me of My Brother Jack because the narrator is a bit of a damp squib like David in My Brother Jack. The more interesting character is Jack or Johnno. And so I found that was like, oh, right, so you've decided that you're so boring you have to write your autobiographical novel about somebody else, about your brother, about your friend. That's interesting. But then the more that I thought about that, the more I thought, I'm not actually a big fan of, I'm going to mispronounce this, that German word, Blingenstrom? You know, coming of age novels. I'm absolutely not really a fan of those. And it was reading this that I've realised why I'm not a fan of these. Coming of age novels are, generally speaking, sort of the expected first novel of a writer. And I have never, ever, ever attempted, thought about a coming of age novel. Because what I realised is you have two kinds of coming of age novels, but both of them have, in some ways, a very similar narrator. And you know who also has a similar narrator? The Great Gatsby, which is also a coming of age novel. The Great Gatsby is a coming of age novel as well. But the novel's narrators are generally insecure, hesitant, they are denying their own interest by saying, oh look, the interesting thing is my friend over here, or this over here, or that over there. I'm not interesting. They're very self-effacing, even though it's about them. And it becomes very clear by the last chapter, this is not about Johnno. This is about the narrator. This is about Dante. But you don't realise how much it's about him until you get to the end. Because, as I think Hassa has said, first-person narration is always about the first-person narrator, no matter where else they're trying to deflect you to. So, the thing about coming-of-age novels is that they always have this sort of hesitant, self-effacing narrator. And I have never, ever, ever been tempted to write a coming-of-age novel because I have always thought of myself as a fairly confident person, and I have always been a fairly confident person. But if I wrote my life like that, I would come across as a conceited ass. I quite possibly am a conceited ass. I don't know. I'm happy with that. That's fine. It's not I don't have to worry about what other people think of me. They can think of me as a conceited ass if they want to. But I know that I would not want to spend ages writing out something like that. Even novels where the narrator is like overcoming, like, oh, I got to uni and I overcame all these things. I knew I was going to go to university at 5. Okay, this is where the conceited ass comes in. So at 5, I knew the way that the school was arranged, the primary school that I went to, was a building, and all along the first floor, you started at kindergarten and you worked along 1, 2, 3, at kindergarten 1, 2, and then you went upstairs and 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you went to high school, and then you went to university. I have no idea where I got this idea from, but I did it. I did it in spite of anyone going and saying, oh no, you can't do that, maybe you should do this, maybe, no, doing it. I am stubborn and I am conceited enough to just decide I'm going to do that. Personally, I like to think of it as confidence, but you know, we can call it conceited. This is what happens, and you know that I do. You know that I like a little bit of woo-woo. This is what happens when you are a metal monkey, Chinese, and you have Mars in Leo. It's gonna do that. It'll come out. It'll come out like that. Now, that's not an overcoming obstacles point of view. That doesn't make this triumph, this hesitant, oh, I don't know if I can. No, I just did it. That does not make a narrative arc. That does not make a narrative arc. There are other things in my childhood, and adolescence, that, no, we're not stirring that up. I don't want to do that. Nah. So ultimately, it's never been a genre that particularly interests me. And it wasn't until I was reading this that I realised how very constructed the genre was. Because, conceited ass that I am, I decided, oh, you just use the arc of your life. No, the whole thing's a construct. The whole thing's a construct. The whole self-effaceiveness is a construct. Of course it is. Still not going to do it. I think the only coming of age stories that I've genuinely enjoyed were like where it's been like, oh yes, I really, really love this. I do like Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. That's quite a unusual construction. And Clive James, because he's funny. And you know, it's kind of hard to be, the self-effaceiveness and Clive James is not quite the same. He's going for the laugh, not the modesty, not the I'm ever so humble. So, not quite the same. But this is a really good book. It's not my particular favourite genre. It did make me realise why I kind of dislike that genre, or that mode of telling a story. But it is, you want a book about old Brisbane, you want a book about the old way that Australia understood itself, you want a beautifully written story of friendship, this book's for you. You want to start with David Malouf, this book's for you. The book he wrote after this was An Imaginary Life, which we have also done. So, yeah, that's Johnno. That's Johnno. It is definitely one to read. Sorry about my little divergence into my dislike of the genre. But it probably explains why I don't bring a lot of books like this. Between not particularly liking books about children, again, rather ironic given my job, it's either I don't like children, or because of my job I don't really like books about children that sentimentalise them. I think that might be it. I don't particularly like sentimentalised children. It's boring. I've met the real deal. They're far more... Real people are far more interesting than a sentimentalised, nostalgic version. Almost all children in that way are nostalgic, or this idea of childhood. Yeah, okay. So I don't particularly like those, and I don't particularly like coming of age stories, because you're bothering to centre yourself, then centre yourself. And if you can't do that without making everyone hate you, well, let them hate you. That's a little bit hard when it's your own life, so I can understand why people don't do it. You have to be a bit of a conceited ass to be allowed to have people hate you. But if you're looking for a place to start with David Malouf, start with his first one. It is, when Patrick White goes and gives it his, yep, this is good, you know it's good. It is very much this, part of what people disliked about it was the strange new voice of it. It is very Australian. It's giving voice to an Australia that people were not quite ready, or perhaps not quite ready to see or have reflected back to them. Though at the same time, David Ireland won the Miles Franklin, I think, in this year, so, or around the same time. So, you know, some critics I think were a little squeamish. The reading public loved it, and have always loved it. So that's why it's still in print. But yeah, that's David Malouf's Johnno, and I will see you again with another adventure in Australian literature later. Bye-bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.